How could the wisest man in history, blessed with divine favor, fall into a tragic cycle of spiritual ruin? What led Solomon, the man chosen to build the temple of God, to a life marked by idolatry, compromise, and regret? This is the untold story of Solomon's final days, a fall from grace that reverberated through Israel's history and altered the trajectory of a kingdom. Early in Solomon's reign, God showed him extraordinary favor. When Solomon came to the throne, he was given a chance that would shape his reign. He saw God in a dream, willing to fulfill any wish. Wisdom beyond his years, Solomon begged not for wealth or long life, but for the capacity to lead his people with intelligence and compassion. God was delighted with his request and gave him wisdom in addition to the financial blessings he had not asked for. This endowment of wisdom became the defining trait of Solomon's reign. It was not long before the world took notice of the young king's unparalleled insight. Solomon's wisdom manifested early in his reign in one of his most famous judgments, the case of two women who each claimed to be the mother of a child. Solomon's brilliant and unconventional solution, offering to divide the child in two, revealed the true mother's identity through her willingness to sacrifice her claim to save the child. This act solidified his reputation as a ruler with divine insight into human nature and justice. Beyond his judicial acumen, Solomon's most profound achievement was the construction of the Temple of Jerusalem. Built on the site where his father David had intended to erect a house for God, the temple stood as the most sacred structure in Israel's religious life, a symbol of God's covenant and presence among his people. Solomon's construction of this temple, described in intricate detail in the Bible, became a cornerstone of his legacy. Under Solomon's rule, Israel enjoyed unprecedented peace and prosperity. His wealth was legendary, and his reputation attracted visitors from across the known world. Most notable among them was the Queen of Sheba, who came to test Solomon's wisdom with hard questions. The Queen, upon witnessing the grandeur of his court and the depth of his knowledge, was left in awe, praising the God of Israel for placing such a wise ruler on the throne. Solomon's wisdom, wealth, and influence seemed limitless during these early years, and his kingdom flourished. Yet, even in the midst of this prosperity, cracks were beginning to form in the foundation of Solomon's reign, cracks that would widen into a full collapse as Solomon's heart drifted from his God. As Solomon's political power grew, so too did his diplomatic reach. To secure Israel's position in the complex political landscape of the ancient Near East, Solomon entered into alliances with neighboring kingdoms, many of which were cemented through marriage. Solomon took wives from Egypt, Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and Hittite nations. These marriages, while politically advantageous, would prove spiritually disastrous. Scripture records that Solomon had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. Many of these women came from nations that worshipped foreign gods, and gradually they led Solomon's heart astray. These foreign alliances introduced religious practices that were deeply contrary to the covenantal relationship Israel had with God. Solomon, once steadfast in his devotion, began to permit and even participate in the worship of idols. This marked a stark departure from Solomon's earlier years, during which he had constructed the temple as a monument to Israel's monotheism. Now, under the influence of his wives, Solomon built high places for gods such as Ashtoreth, Molech, and Chemosh, deities whose worship involved idolatrous and often detestable practices. His heart, once wholly devoted to the God of Israel, became divided. The spiritual compromise that Solomon embraced through these marriages was a slow but steady erosion of his loyalty to God. What had begun as political pragmatism turned into spiritual apostasy. The very king who had once been tasked with leading Israel in righteousness was now participating in the same idolatry that had plagued the nations surrounding Israel. Solomon's gradual departure from God did not go unnoticed. Scripture reveals that God, who had appeared to Solomon twice before, now confronted him with a stark warning. Despite Solomon's earlier devotion and the divine wisdom bestowed upon him, God's patience had limits. The Lord declared that because Solomon had turned away from his commandments and embraced idolatry, there would be severe consequences. In 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 11 to 12, God speaks directly to Solomon. "Since this is your attitude and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son." This divine rebuke carried a profound and far-reaching judgment. Although Solomon would remain on the throne until his death, the kingdom would not endure in the hands of his descendants. The unified kingdom of Israel, which had reached its zenith under Solomon's reign, would be divided, a fate that Solomon's father David had worked so hard to avoid. Solomon's spiritual decline did not only affect his personal relationship with God, but also set the stage for political instability and division. His idolatry opened the door for adversaries to rise against him, both from within and outside Israel. Among these adversaries were Hadad the Edomite and Rezon, both of whom harassed Israel during Solomon's later years. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 14 to 25. Additionally, internal dissent began to brew, foreshadowing the eventual rebellion that would tear the kingdom apart. As Solomon neared the end of his life, the consequences of his choices became increasingly apparent. The once unified and prosperous kingdom was beginning to show signs of strain. The grandeur of Solomon's early reign, marked by wealth, wisdom, and international prestige, was now overshadowed by internal divisions and external threats. Solomon's later years were not only marked by political instability, but also by personal regret and disillusionment. Despite his immense wealth and numerous accomplishments, Solomon found himself grappling with the meaninglessness of life. This internal struggle is powerfully expressed in the Book of Ecclesiastes, traditionally attributed to Solomon, where he reflects on the vanity of human endeavors. "Vanity of vanities," he writes, "all is vanity." Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2. In these writings, Solomon laments the futility of pursuing wealth, pleasure, and knowledge apart from a relationship with God. The once wise king, who had started his reign with such promise, now found himself isolated and spiritually adrift. His accumulation of wives, wealth, and political power had not brought the fulfillment he had hoped for. Instead, he was left to confront the spiritual emptiness that comes from a life lived outside the boundaries of God's will. The story of Solomon's downfall offers a sobering lesson about the dangers of compromise and the fragility of human wisdom. Solomon's life is a testament to the fact that no amount of knowledge or insight can substitute for a heart wholly devoted to God. Even the wisest of men can fall into ruin if they allow themselves to be swayed by the temptations of the world. One of the most significant lessons from Solomon's life is the high cost of idolatry. Solomon's decision to embrace the gods of his foreign wives not only led to his personal spiritual decline, but also had profound consequences for the nation of Israel. His divided heart set the stage for the eventual division of the kingdom, a division that would result in centuries of strife and conflict. Solomon's story also underscores the danger of unchecked power and indulgence. Throughout his reign, Solomon amassed great wealth and built a reputation for wisdom and success. Yet his pursuit of pleasure, political alliances, and material gain ultimately led him away from the God who had granted him all these things. His life serves as a warning that worldly success, when pursued at the expense of spiritual integrity, leads only to emptiness and regret. Despite his tragic end, Solomon's writings in Ecclesiastes suggest that he may have come to recognize the futility of his choices. In his reflections, Solomon acknowledges that true meaning and fulfillment can only be found in a life lived in reverence to God. "Fear God and keep his commandments," Solomon concludes, "for this is the duty of all mankind." Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13. In these final words, we see a glimpse of the wisdom that once defined his reign, a wisdom that points back to the importance of faithfulness to God. The life of King Solomon is one of the greatest tragedies in biblical history. A king blessed with divine wisdom and favor, Solomon's reign began with unparalleled promise. He built the temple, ushered in an era of peace and prosperity, and became renowned for his wisdom throughout the ancient world. Yet, despite these achievements, Solomon's life ended in heartbreak and disillusionment. His fall from grace was not the result of a sudden rebellion against God, but a slow and steady drift away from the values and principles that had once defined his reign. Solomon's embrace of foreign gods, his pursuit of worldly pleasures, and his disregard for God's commandments led to his ultimate downfall. His kingdom was divided, his legacy tainted, and his heart filled with regret. Solomon's story serves as a powerful reminder that even the wisest among us are not immune to temptation and spiritual decline. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of compromising one's faith for the sake of worldly success. In the end, Solomon's life teaches us that true wisdom is not found in wealth, power, or knowledge, but in a heart that remains fully devoted to God.